Welcome to Blooming Wand, your home for grounded spiritual content. I'm Emily O'Neill, evidential psychic medium, intuitive healer, and mentor. And on today's episode, I want to dive into spirit guides. Where did this concept come from? How did it become so popular in spiritual practices and in sort of the maybe new age spirituality space? There's courses out there that say, meet your spirit guides. People are giving channeled messages from their quote spirit guides. And I'm just don't think I ever really thought about where the heck did this concept really kind of come from. So I wanted to dive into it on this episode. So let's get started. When I tell people that I'm an evidential psychic medium, one of the most common questions I get is about spirit guides. And people are like, how do I meet my spirit guides? Can you connect me with my spirit guides? Or what's this? What are they? And to be honest with you, I always tell people it's different for everybody and it depends on probably who's asking. But one thing I think we can all agree on is that the language or the term spirit guides is everywhere in modern spirituality, from Instagram posts to meditation apps to spiritual best sellers. But here's what rarely gets discussed. Where did this concept come from? What are we really invoking when we use this language? And does it matter that we've stripped these ideas from their cultural contexts? As someone who values both spiritual practice and intellectual rigor, I believe understanding the origins of our spiritual concept isn't just an academic thing, it's essential for practicing with integrity. So, let's trace how the term spirit guides became the catch-all term that it is today. So, what came before indigenous and ancient practices? Before the modern concept of spirit guides, humans across virtually every culture developed frameworks for understanding helpful spiritual beings. But these concepts were deeply embedded in specific cultural and religious contexts. In classic shamanic traditions across the Arctic, Americas, and other regions, shamans worked with what they called helping spirits, which were animal allies, ancestral spirits, nature spirits, and probably other spirits. And the relationship between shaman and spirit helper was cultivated through specific practices of isolation, fasting, vision quests, initiation experiences. And here's where it gets complicated. These weren't generic spirit guides that anyone could call upon. They were part of specific cultural traditions with their own protocols, ethics, and cosmologies. And when non-Indigenous people claim like a Native American spirit guide, like, oh, I have a Native American spirit guide, or maybe they're leaning into the traditional practices of Indigenous peoples when they're thinking about spirit guides, or they appropriate shamanic practices kind of wholesale, and this is really big in New Age spirituality. They're engaging in what anthropologist Alice Kehoe critiques as a cultural appropriation that misrepresents or dilutes Indigenous practices. Alice Kehoe is a really interesting person. Her work is very interesting. I would highly recommend doing a search on her and kind of looking into her research and her perspective. She's definitely not the only one, but I just found her work to be pretty interesting. Now, Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies, Greek philosophies, and medieval grimoires, they all have like ideas of spirit guides. The Greeks had this idea of the daemon, the demon, and in medieval and Renaissance eras, it was really a popularity around angelic beings that were kind of guides. They all have their own specific kind of context because I think they speak to the time in which people were engaging them. They weren't like a one-size-fits-all type of a concept. So what happened in the 19th century that created our modern grab bag concept of spirit guides? And this is where I'm kind of brought to the late more like 1848 to the 1920s, actually, now that I think about it, where spiritualism creates the template. If you're using the term spirit guide in a Western spiritual context, you're almost certainly drawing from the 19th century spiritualist movement, whether you know it or not. The modern, so modern spiritualism rather, I'm sorry, I was like a little tongue twister for me, exploded in 1848 when the Fox sisters claimed to communicate with spirits through mysterious rappings. And despite eventually confessing to fraud, they sparked a movement that captivated millions. Like people were fascinated with them and their claims. Now, spiritualism established that the spirits of deceased humans could communicate through mediums and that more evolved spirits could offer guidance. Now, here's something I think is kind of crucial. Early spiritualist mediums were or trying to be evidential. They provided specific, verifiable details, so names, physical descriptions, memories that could only come from a particular deceased person. I would argue that that information came from somewhere, and I think a lot of mediums would say, yeah, it's definitely coming from a deceased person, but we can't really validate that. So that's like a little bit of a side note. We can validate that mediums can get accurate information consistently and repeatedly, but where that information comes from is still kind of a mystery. Some people feel pretty certain about that, where it comes from. I always choose to remain open and kind of fluid with that idea. But the whole point was that spiritualists wanted to provide proof of survival after death. So, like that consciousness or the soul survives the death of the body. And they weren't dispensing generic wisdom about sort of, quote, live your truth or follow your heart. They were saying, remember when you went fishing at Lake George in 1842 and fell in the water? That level of specificity really, really mattered at that time within the early spiritualist movement. But this is very different than what comes later. So shifting into a period that kind of overlaps with the one we were just talking about, so like about around 1875 and maybe the 1930s, Theosophy blends Eastern and Western concepts around spirit guides. And I feel like this is really interesting stuff. It got me thinking, and I have so many thoughts and ideas about it. I have mixed emotions about it. So this is how you know you hit on something juicy. So in 1875, Helena Blavatsky co-founded the Theosophical Society, and this is where we see the first major kind of synthesis. So deliberate blending of Eastern and Western spiritual concepts into, frankly, something new. Now, I keep wanting to say her name wrong, so I have to pause for a second, because do you ever have that happen to you where you read a name wrong over and over and over while you're doing research, and then you have to say it, and then you keep wanting to say it the wrong way? So Blavatsky claimed to receive teachings from the, quote, Mahatmas, or masters of the ancient wisdom. This is what she called them. And she claimed they were highly evolved beings, primarily residing in Tibet. And unlike spiritualism's kind of ordinary deceased humans, these were exceptional beings who had achieved extraordinary development. And Theosophy claimed to unify the esoteric core of all world religions, so Christian mysticism, Hindu and Buddhist concepts, Egyptian wisdom, Western occultism, you're getting it all with Theosophy, into a grand unified theory. But there's something kind of complicated here. By claiming all religions share the same esoteric core, Theosophy could position itself as having the real truth that transcended any particular culture. And it could borrow freely from all of these cultures without being accountable to those that are actually living within those traditions and probably have a deeper understanding of them. So it's really just merging everything in and unifying it, which I don't know that there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, except that maybe the intention was to unify wisdom or whatever. But I do think that it kind of is homogenizing things, that maybe we shouldn't be doing that with. I don't know. If I was deeply devoted to a spiritual practice and I saw somebody merge it or the core concepts of it without maybe having lived it or fully understanding it into this group, and I might have feelings about that. So it's important to kind of really think through this and hold some of these ideas gently and let them kind of sink into your system so that you can think about them. You don't need to make up your mind about anything right now, but I know that for me, diving into the idea of spirit guides brought up a lot for me to ponder, and that's how you know you've hit on a good topic and a good subject. And we don't have to have the answer to everything. I just like exploring these ideas with all of you, and I hope it gets us thinking and having some dialogue about some of the things we see in modern day spirituality. So, if I'm really thinking critically about this, unlike the spiritualist mediums who provided evidential details and that was kind of what their focus was, Theosophical teachings came through as a grand kind of universal pronouncement about cosmic law and the spiritual evolution like spiritual evolution in general. So she's working with these Mahatmas, they're giving her information. We don't really know who these Mahatmas are. They're not like a deceased relative or something like that. There's something that she says, Blavatsky says she's connecting with. So the authority came from the impressiveness of the teachings themselves. People were pretty into this, not from specific, testable, verifiable information. So you're kind of getting grand pronouncements about spirituality and spiritual practices and maybe living a fulfilling life. You're not getting necessarily specific details. Now, in the 1970s and the 1980s, New Age creates the catch-all. So we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit. New Age spirituality becomes big business. And the 70s and 80s saw an explosion of channeling. And this is when the sort of spirit guide becomes the umbrella term it is today. At least that's kind of what I'm thinking. Encompassing everything from spiritualist contacts to Theosophical masters to newly channeled entities. I mean, we have people saying they're channeling people from Atlantis or Palladians or Arcturians. I don't know what any of that really is. That's probably a subject for another episode. But whatever it is, people are channeling entities. Some people say they channel aliens. Now, at this point in time, I think there's a little bit of a rebrand on mediums. And instead of being called mediums, I think we see the term channels more than we maybe do mediums. I could be wrong about that, but that's the kind of sense I'm getting. And we're receiving messages from an even wider array of sources. So deceased humans, extraterrestrials, angels, nature spirits, ascended masters, whatever that means, collective consciousness, and people's own quote, higher selves. And the term spirit guide becomes a catch-all for any non-physical being offering guidance. So I think that's what people think today, at least based off the conversations that I've had as people are thinking of spirit guides, as there is a broad spectrum of what that can mean. Now, by the 1980s, the New Age spiritual movement had synthesized spiritualist mediumship, theosophical masters, and indigenous concepts, by the way, that were often appropriated, Eastern ideas, Western angel lore, and UFO experiences, and they're all blended under this spirit guide term. And the specific cultural context that originally give these concepts meaning are kind of stripped away in favor of generic language anyone could use without committing to any particular tradition. Almost all channeled material moved completely away from verifiable information. Channels delivered cosmic philosophy and spiritual teachings, but rarely anything that you could actually verify. Now, I do want to say that I didn't, because this was kind of hard to do, find research on any channel that predicted anything consistently and accurately that could be explained outside of like a lucky guess. If anybody does know if there was any channel or medium or psychic or whoever who consistently and regularly predicted things or gave messages that were verifiable, I'd love to know a little bit more about that. But what I really wanted to talk about is by the time we get to the 1980s and probably even today, the function of channeling has changed. It was no longer about proving survival after death, but about accessing universal wisdom. And I want to say that I'm approaching this from the Western perspective, so how this came like to America and to Europe and kind of other Western cultures. I think across the globe, channeling and mediums, there's a long, 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 long history. But how we got to where we are today, I can see from the perspective that I was raised in, how the spiritualist movement had a big impact on that. Obviously, in the Americas, we have a long history of indigenous folks practicing with spirit guides in their own cultures. Please don't think of indigenous cultures in the Americas as a monolith. It's a vast array of rich cultures that are not one-dimensional. So I just want to point that out because I think it's important to. And so we're in the sort of age of spirit guides providing universal wisdom. And now we get into the business of channeling, and it is big, big business. And I think that's something that we should talk about. So the modern channeling or meet your spirit guides industry has become such big business. And according to some of the research that I did, the global spiritual services market was valued at $376 billion in 2024. And it's projected to reach $787.4 billion by 2035. Whoa. So you want to learn to channel? There's an industry ready to teach you. Basic online courses range from $29 to $250 to $1,000. There's certification programs that start at a couple hundred and go into the thousands and plus. There's intensive training, multi-$1,000 programs, and ongoing membership communities that range from $20 to $100 plus a month. And many programs explicitly teach not just how to channel, but how to build a channeling business. And this is where I think we're seeing on social media the rise of like tarot readings, giving generic messages where they are like, if you're here, this message has found you for a reason, and it kind of gives generic wisdom, or I have a channeled message for the collective. And that content is really, really popular and very appealing to a lot of people. And I think it's worth thinking about why that is. So contemporary channeling has found a home on YouTube, Instagram, and other subscription platforms, and channels accumulate hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And messages follow a remarkably similar pattern. Like they'll say things such as, the energy is shifting. You're more powerful than you know. Trust the process. Everything is unfolding perfectly. Oh my gosh, the other one that's coming to my mind is I'll talk about the timeline is shifting. I don't know what the heck that means. Or, what's another one they say? That's probably enough, but I think you get the gist. It's always talking about shifts, transitions, transformations, and this message found you at the perfect time. And they're very affirming and they're very validating. I used to consume a lot of that content, by the way. It's kind of addicting. I don't so much anymore because it dawned on me, I'm like, this isn't really helping me. But it's really popular. And I think I want to point out that these messages are unfalsifiable, so there's no way to verify them. They're universally applicable, and they're affirming rather than challenging and comforting. So compare this to evidential mediumship. So your grandmother is showing me a bluebird figurine that sat on her kitchen windowsill. She's laughing about the time you broke its wing when you were 7. That's either accurate or it's not when you're giving a reading to somebody. When someone's livelihood depends on their claimed connection to guides or spirit guides or ascended masters or whatever, we have to ask what incentive exists to question the source, and why are the messages so consistently affirming, and what about accountability? I want to dive into the psychology behind generic guidance. This was really fascinating to me. Um, because I'm a human being, and like I said, I found that stuff really, I was really drawn into it until I wasn't. And we're going to talk about the Barnum effect. We all want to feel affirmed and validated. I know I do. And channeled messages definitely provide that. But we need to take into consideration why generic spiritual guidance feels so personally meaningful. In 1948, psychologist Bertram Forer conducted an experiment that would reveal something crucial about human psychology. He gave his students a personality test and then handed each one a personality description based on their results. And students rated the description as highly accurate, averaging between 4.26 out of 5 for personal accuracy. But here's the catch. Every single person received the exact same generic description. And this phenomenon has become known as the Barnum effect, or Forer effect, named after the 19th century showman P.T. Barnum, who understood that vague but appealing claims could captivate audiences. Because they do. And the effect describes our tendency to believe generalized descriptions that are, we think that, it's describing our tendency to believe that generalized descriptions are highly accurate and uniquely tailored to us, even when they could be applying to almost anyone. Now, understanding this is crucial for anyone interested in spiritual discernment, because it explains exactly why those channeled messages feel so compelling. When a channel says you're going through a period of transformation, or you've been doubting yourself lately, but your guides want you to know that you're on the right path, our brains actively work to make those statements feel true and specific to our lives. We don't notice how broadly these statements can apply. Instead, our minds search for times when it's felt true and use those as specific instances of kind of quote proof that the statement is accurate. Here's why the Barnum effect works so powerfully in spiritual contexts. Vague statements fit everyone. Consider the statement like, you have a great need for other people to like and admire you, but sometimes you need alone time. This is one that someone said to me. And most people can relate to both parts of this, and your brain doesn't evaluate whether this is universally true. It finds the moments in your life when you felt this way and accept it as personally accurate. I mean, I think we've all felt that way. And authority amplifies acceptance. So the effect becomes even stronger when information comes from a perceived expert or authority figure. If someone claims to be channeling ascended masters, archangels, or beings from what they call higher dimensions, we're more likely to accept their vague pronouncements as a profound truth rather than generic platitudes. Positive statements bypass skepticism. We're especially likely to accept generalized descriptions when they're flattering or affirming. Messages like, you're more powerful than you know, or your sensitivity is actually your greatest gift, feel good. So we're less inclined to question whether they're actually specific to us or just universally appealing. We actively create the meaning. This is the really important part. When presented with vague spiritual guidance, our minds fill in the gaps. We do the interpretive work that makes the generic statements feel specifically applicable to our unique circumstances, and the channel provides the framework. Then we provide the personal data that makes it make sense to us. This is exactly why so much contemporary channeled material follows those remarkably similar patterns that I just talked about earlier. The energy is shifting, trust the process, everything's unfolding perfectly. These statements, again, are unfalsifiable, universally applicable, and very affirming. They're perfectly designed, whether intentionally or not. I'm not saying people are necessarily being malicious about this when they're channeling, but they channel they trigger the Barnum effect. So compare this to evidential mediumship when I say your grandmother is showing me that bluebird figurine that sat in the kitchen windowsill and she's laughing about the time you broke it when you were 7. There's no room for the Barnum effect. That's either accurate or it's not. Either your grandmother had a bluebird figurine or she didn't. You either broke its wing as a child or you didn't. Now, the specificity eliminates that psychological wiggle room that allows us to make vague statements feel personally true. And understanding the Barnum effect doesn't mean all spiritual experiences are invalid or that guidance is always just psychological projection, but it does mean we need to be more careful about what we accept as evidence or genuine contact with non-physical beings versus what might be our own mind creating meaning from intentionally vague language. When you encounter spiritual guidance, whether from a channel, a card reading, or your own sense of inner knowing, ask yourself, is this specific enough that it could be proven wrong? Or is it vague enough that I could make it fit almost any situation in my life? And that distinction does matter. Now, what I actually encounter as an evidential medium is very different from like this channeling that we see today. Does the existence of a massive channeling industry mean that all spirit contact is illegitimate? I don't think so. But we need to get much more specific about what we mean. And we need to understand that when there is a lack of specificity, our brains are going to step in and make it make sense, right? In my work, I do focus on evidential contact, so providing specific verifiable information that could only come from a deceased loved one. Or, if you're working psychically, you get it from maybe other places. I don't receive really cosmic pronouncements. I get, she's showing me a yellow kitchen, she's laughing about burned cookies, she wants you to know she remembers how terrible she was at baking. Like, I'm getting details. And I do think that specificity matters. It's verifiable and it provides actual evidence of contact with a particular consciousness, not just impressive sounding universal truths. Now, I will say that in readings, after we've kind of established who is coming through, and I've given at least 3 to 5 pieces of verifiable evidential information, I am often moved to give a message or speak to something that's specifically going on in a person's life. But again, there is a level of specificity there that I think people can say, yeah, that's true. I'm thinking of one time where a person was really thinking about moving because she was splitting her life between 2 places. I knew what those 2 places were. I knew that she was thinking about moving, and I did get the message that a move, although it felt impossible to her, would end up being really beneficial to her. And she knew exactly what I was talking about because of the amount of detailed information I was able to give around that. And with that, the feeling of, if you've been thinking about it, the feeling that I'm getting is you should do it. And that was what came through in the reading. So how do we engage with spirit guides ethically? After all this history and critique, you might be wondering, does this mean we can't work with spirit guides? Not at all, but it does mean we need to be thoughtful about how we do it. There's a significant difference between personal spiritual practice and public spiritual work. In our own practice, experiencing message of love, support, and guidance from what feels like a force greater than yourself is both valid and meaningful. It happens to me all the time. I've experienced it, and my clients have experienced it, and lots of people have experienced it. And the comfort and the wisdom and the sense of connection that comes from these experiences, I believe it's real, regardless of whether we can prove the external source or maybe even validate some of that experience. But I felt love come to me through different things. I felt help and guidance at different times in my life that was pretty miraculous. I've been in the presence of some miraculous experiences as people were experiencing it themselves and like witnessed it. So I'm not saying, it's all bad or anything like that. I try really hard to refrain from good, bad, binary, dualistic thinking. The emphasis on evidence and specificity that I advocate for in my work is primarily for public practice. When you're reading for others, charging for services, or claiming spiritual authority that affects other people, or you're taking their money, that's when I think verification does matter, and when cultural appropriation becomes harmful, and when, the business model needs some scrutiny. For your personal practice, the ethics just look a little bit different. And I'm open to the nuance around that. I think it's important to get specific about what you're actually experiencing. Are you sensing the presence of a deceased loved one, connecting with what feels like a helpful non-physical guidance, accessing a sense of the divine or universal love? There's value in being able to describe your actual experience rather than immediately using borrowed terminology like spirit guide, not to prove anything, but to understand your own spiritual life more deeply. I think it's important to honor cultural boundaries. If you're drawn to practices from a specific tradition, whether indigenous shamanism, Buddhist practice, an African diaspora, where all the traditions from Africa, do you do the work of actually learning from teachers within those communities? This matters even in private practice because it's about respect. Take classes, understand the cultural context, and be accountable to those lineages. Don't just take what appeals to you and strip away the parts that challenge you. And if you do find somebody from certain cultural traditions that you would like to work with, make sure that you have consent to engage in that. And if you don't, then that's okay. You don't have to take that personally. It means that's just not the right thing for you. Find something that is. Which brings me to exploring your own lineage. Before borrowing from other cultures, get curious about your own ancestors' spiritual practices. What did your great-grandparents believe? What folk practices existed in your family's culture of origin? And you might find rich spiritual connection through your own lineage. And I do want to speak to this. I live in America. I'm a colonizer. My people are not from the Americas. When they came here, my people got separated from their cultural traditions, many of whom did so intentionally. Like they didn't necessarily want to bring that with them when they came to the United States. And a lot of them adopted religious practices, like a vast array of them. But when I intuitively go back through my lineage and understand who my people are, and my people are from England and Northwestern Europe, as well as Sweden and Denmark, and as well as Austria and parts of Germany, and even Scotland. So, and I've learned about this through a variety of tools, and I think I would love to do an episode about that down the road, because I think many of us feel disconnected from our lineages. I know that I did. I used to call myself a lost daughter because I had no connection to the wisdom of my ancestors, and it's become a priority for me to connect in with that. And there's a practice and a process for that. And I have found rich spiritual connection in connecting with my own lineages. And it has been very unique and special to me. And your journey with that, should you choose to pursue it, will be so unique and special to you. The other thing I want to say is we can maintain our own authority, even when receiving what feels like a genuine spiritual guidance. You're still responsible for your choices, and spiritual experiences can inform your decisions without removing your agency. And be cautious of anyone who claims their spirit guides give them authority over you or your spiritual path. If you do decide to practice publicly, apply the different standard. If you're reading for others, teaching, or charging for services, that's when evidential standards, I think, to me, become extremely essential. When your claims affect other people, or when you're building a business on spiritual authority, verification, and accountability, and cultural respect move from personal ethics to professional responsibility. And I will say I do question a lot of what is happening in the industry, and I not in a way other than I'm curious about it, and it helps me understand how I want to practice with the public and what I want my personal practices to be like, what suits me and feels good to me in alignment with my ethics and integrity. You got to watch out for exploitative business models, even as a consumer. If someone's selling you access to spirit guides, certifications in channeling, or ongoing subscriptions to guided messages, ask critical questions. What makes their claimed connection legitimate? Are they providing specific, verifiable information or generic affirmations? And what accountability structures exist? I always say stay humble and stay curious. We don't fully understand the nature of consciousness, what happens after death, or whether non-physical beings communicate with us. Your personal spiritual experiences don't require proof or validation from anyone else, but holding our beliefs with both genuine openness and mystery and awareness of our own capacity for projection and self-deception might be the most honest position that we can take. The goal here isn't to eliminate personal spiritual experiences or demand proof for every moment of connection with something greater than yourself. It's to recognize the difference between private practice and public work, and between receiving comfort and claiming authority, between accountability to yourself and being accountable to community or clientele. You can absolutely experience guidance, love, and support from sources beyond your conscious mind, whatever you choose to call them. And the ethics come in when we decide what to do with these experiences, especially when they involve other people's spiritual lives, money, or well-being. So where does this leave us? I don't think the answer is answers to abandon all concepts concepts like spirit guides. I think cultural exchange and spiritual evolution are very, very natural. But we owe it to ourselves and to the traditions we're drawing from to practice with awareness and integrity. So I've crafted some questions worth asking. These are the questions I ask myself. Do we understand what we're actually doing? When we talk about spirit guides, do we know we're working within a framework that started with spiritualism, or was it synthesized theosophy, or is it just something generalized from New Age channeling? When people talk about the idea of this ascended masters, do they know where that concept even originated and came from? So, are we appropriating closed traditions? If we're claiming Native American spirit guides or adopting shamanic practices without connection to the cultures from which they come, we're engaging in cultural appropriation. And it happens a lot in spirituality today. I mean, the example that I always use is we talk about, I'm going to sage this or that. Well, saging is a specific practice to specific Native American culture that's centered around white sage, which became endangered when it got commercialized. So meaning that indigenous folks couldn't go and harvest their sacred plants for their sacred practices because people were selling it so everybody could sage. Well, that's a closed practice, but a lot of people are like, dang, I don't know that. And you can get sage anywhere right now. But I would bet that your own personal cultural lineage has a practice of smoke cleansing or working with plants or woods or different things to cleanse spaces. So that generic term of saging is an appropriation. Are we being specific or staying vague? Vagueness can become a cover for projection or self-deception. If we're receiving guidance, how do we verify it's coming from outside ourselves? And what's that information that we're getting, and how is it helping us, and how are we going to apply it in our lives? And if you're working as a practitioner and you do notice that you're staying pretty vague, I mean, you can work towards more specificity for sure. And I think that realization could be helpful to you. I mean, it's something that I have to constantly do work around. I think we we all can fall into a not maybe ideal practice of falling into vague things for a variety of reasons, some of which I've discussed in this episode. The other question I have here is, what happens when a spiritual authority becomes profitable? When income depends on a claimed connection to guides or just being able to give collective messages, how does that affect the messages received? So if I'm making a ton of money off of giving these vague messages and it's making people feel good, am I going to challenge myself or stop doing that if my livelihood depends on it? After all, I'm making money and people are saying, this is great, I resonate with this. So, people that are falling into this are going to say, I'm not doing anything wrong. And I'm maybe not necessarily saying that they are, but I think that over time, people will fall away from that just like I did, because you'll start to realize that it's not really offering as much as one might think it is to their spiritual practices. And instead of relying on generic messages, maybe seeking a deeper personal spiritual practice or connecting with other folks that are like-minded to deepen your spiritual practice will be nothing but rewarding. And if we all have our own entry points into spirituality, and for a lot of people, I think it's those channeled messages or collective tarot readings, and fair enough. But your journey doesn't have to stop there. And wouldn't it be so exciting if it evolved beyond that? There's a whole world beyond that that's pretty miraculous. It does take time and effort to cultivate any practice or do the learning, but it's rewarding and worth it. And understanding kind of this context and history, which is not, I haven't covered everything here. It doesn't diminish the value of spiritual practice. It deepens it. And when we know where our concepts come from, we can practice with more integrity and discernment. And that's what I'm really trying to do here at Blooming Wand, is I'm sharing with you the things that you all are asking me, the Blooming Wand community and my clients, but I'm also sharing with you the things that I think about as I do this work and my practice shifts and changes. I'm a thinker, and I'm always like, why is that? And so I thought, well, if I'm already thinking about this stuff and doing the research, it'd be great to share it with other people so we can have a conversation. And, for me, this whole thing has helped clarify something for me. It means that being specific in my mediumship work, providing evidence, not generic wisdom, is important. It means that being honest about what I know and what I don't know is important. It means that I want to respect cultural origins and not appropriate from traditions that aren't mine to claim. It means staying curious, staying critical, and staying open to genuine spiritual experience all at the same time. It also means being willing to ask the uncomfortable questions. When we receive guidance that can't be verified, that confirms what we want to believe, that gives us permission to speak with spiritual authority, is that really contact with something beyond ourselves? It could be our ego. Or is it a beautifully elaborate way of trusting our inner knowing while attributing it to something else? What if you could attribute that inner knowing to you? I don't have a definitive answer, but I think the question itself is worth sitting with. I'm going to continue to sit with it. And whatever you call the source of wisdom in your life, spirit guides, guardian angels, ancestors, or simply your own deepest knowing, may you work with whatever it is you choose to call it with both openness and discernment. And I want you to know that you can find the sources that I kind of refer to or got some of this information from at bloomingwand.com. Click explore and go to the blog and you can get that information there. I'm trying to provide like links so you guys can look at some of the stuff that I was reading when I created this episode. And I would love for you to sign up for my newsletter. It's my number one way of staying in communication with the community. And when you get the newsletter, you'll always get a link to the blog, a link to the podcast, a link to the YouTube. I often provide freebies, so worksheets, meditations, and other tools to help you cultivate and support the development of your personal self care and spiritual practices. I have my one on one services, which are available to you. And that's really the only thing I ask for payment on, is if you want to work with me one on one. Other than that, I try to provide a lot of stuff that's got no paywall with it. And that's sort of just part of my spiritual practice and being of service to community. So I'm so glad that you're all here. Do like and subscribe, leave a comment, shoot me an email at emily@bloomingwand.com. And you know what I'm going to say, because I say it every time. Take good care of yourselves, get those journals out, and I will see you soon.